Hey friends, it's Emily Ruff here. Happy new moon, solar eclipse, Mercury retrograde, Saturn retrograde. Lots of fun stuff happening in the cosmos this week. I'm hopping on a bit early just to let our crowd gather tonight. It's so nice to see some of our students from our current moon medicine class here with us, and other students from Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary, from the School of Holistic Living. It's so nice to see you all here and welcome. I'm going to be joined shortly by my dear friend Wilnise Francois, my co-teacher in the moon medicine course. And tonight is all about assessing the celestial forecast, seeing what's happening tonight in the stars, and how we can use tools in our apothecary, in our movement practice, in our food, in our rituals, in our ceremonies, and in our daily life to navigate the energies that are moving through the stars right now with more grace and more ease, and also to take advantage of their energy and influence. A lot of times phenomena like planets in retrograde get a bad rap, and actually there are some beneficial elements to these periods in the skies that can be productive, that can be beneficial. So as my friend Wilnise is joining us right now, if you haven't yet, go to our course website, moonmedicine.org. That's moonmedicine.org. And you can download our lesson for the new moon solar eclipse and learn a little bit more, and you'll get some planner pages, some calendar pages, some journal exercises, and just a little bit more that'll supplement the conversation that Wilnise and I will be having tonight. So, hey everyone, welcome, and hey Wilnise, so great to see you.
Hey everyone. Hello, Emily. Hope everyone is well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all so much for being part of our share tonight. You know, I invited Wilnise to gather and for us to have a chat, partly because I just love to talk cosmos with Wilnise and to geek out about what's going on in the stars and how it affects us. And, you know, I've learned a lot from Wilnise about different tools that she uses in her practice and rituals and ceremonies that, you know, are not complicated, not rocket science. They're really simple practices, and leaning into the earth and grounding ourselves in the tools that are around us to help us walk through and navigate everything that's going on in the stars. So I'm so excited to be here with you, Wilnise, and Wilnise and I are both excited for everyone that's joining us to just share a little bit about what is going on in the sky right now and what it means to us and how we're moving through it. And hopefully some of those tools can be helpful to all of you. So
Yeah,
to
totally.
start out, Wilnise, I just wanted to invite you to share with folks a little bit about who you are, the work you do, and also how you got into the study of the stars.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks again for inviting me. I adore having these conversations with you, especially sharing just about our love of, the cosmos. But for anyone who's not familiar, my name is Wilnise Francois. I am a self-proclaimed nurse herbalist, astro herbalist that infuses my love of people, plants, and the stars into, I guess, my offering out to the world. I love refamiliarizing people to just the magic that we have at our feet and above our heads, that help to create loads of balance in our lives, that sometimes we tend to forget that those tools are right there for us. So infusing just the magic of the plants and the stars into just everyday practices really brings such beauty into my life that I love to share, and just show folks how easy and accessible it can be for us.
Yeah, well, your passion certainly shines through in your teachings, in our moon medicine course, and just out in the world, and really with anyone that follows you on social or on other programs that you do knows what amazing teacher you are, and just how embodied these practices and teachings are in your daily walk, which I think just makes those teachings so authentic and accessible for students like myself that are connecting. So.
Blows my mind every time you say it.
Well, Wilnise and I have known each other for a couple of years through her involvement at the School of Holistic Living, where in addition to moon medicine, she teaches astrology and herbalism. She teaches in our Roots Roundtable program. She supports the work of the school and our mission in the community in a lot of different ways. And I came to the school. We celebrate our 15-year as a nonprofit in Central Florida this month, in fact, which is a great celebration. And in that 15 years, it's been such a gift to work with the plants that I love and share. And I know that as Wilnise and some of my moon medicine students know, I really got into both the study of plants and the study of the stars, in large part thanks to my father, who was a botany and an astronomy professor. So when I was 2 and 3 years old, we were walking out in the woods learning the botanical names of plants, and we were also driving in the middle of the night with sleeping bags in the trunk out to country roads far outside of the light pollution, where we could watch meteor showers or eclipses or comets, whatever kind of phenomena was going on. And that, childhood influence really carried with me into adulthood, and feels like such a great gift and grace to be able to share my love and passion of these things with students and the community. And I think, much like Wilnise, it's really an honor and a gift to be able to connect with the earth and the stars, because we are both made of the cosmos and the dirt beneath our feet. We are embodiments of the celestial heavens as much as we are of the deep core of the earth, and we are sort of that expression of the two elements woven together. So to use those in our practice and in our walk to guide us with our physical health, with our emotional well-being, with our relationships, understanding why we might be a little more irritable with a partner this week, or why we might want a little more time to ourselves, and things like that are just all, for me, a part of what this study has informed in my life. So this particular week, Wilnise, here we are tomorrow morning around sunrise on the East Coast. We
around 7.
are going through a new moon solar eclipse. This is the second eclipse of what we call an eclipse season. Eclipses always occur in pairs. So we had a full moon lunar eclipse in late May, and this is the partner solar eclipse to that. We're also in the middle of Mercury retrograde. We have a couple weeks left of that process. We are in Saturn retrograde. We have a couple months left of that process. Jupiter moves retrograde next week. We are in a busy time in the highways in the sky. So so how let's talk about eclipses. How is this eclipse season moving through in your life, Wilnise, and let's share a little bit about that to start out.
Let's talk about it. I mean, personally, I love eclipse season because I feel like it's that reset from the universe that kind of gives us that moment to reflect or shine in whatever aspect in our charts. And so what's really beautiful about this time is that we have like a break from a lot of these planets that are usually really aggressive in how they express in our lives, right? Things like Saturn being retrograde, even Mercury being retrograde is something really beautiful for us, especially in a new moon with the eclipse, right? So new moons kind of signify the season of new beginnings for us, right? Like we get to foster a new way of seeing our worlds in whatever way they manifest. And so eclipse for me helped to really shine into those dark spaces that we're not necessarily seeing just yet, right? Those spaces where we need a little bit more clarity. And so for me, it's really showing how my communication, the way in which I see communication, the way in which I engage in communication, I interact socially, the same is really highlighted for me. And that plays along with the way our Gemini is sitting in my chart and what house it's in right now. But it's giving me a time specifically because Mercury is retrograding, right? So we're having that moment for us to kind of reassess ourselves and like reread those contracts, right? Make sure our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed. And it's a beautiful opportunity for me because naturally, like I'm a person who's very swift and, just kind of just puts thing out there. I love to procrastinate, get the job done, right? But it's really allowing me that moment to realize, well, how effective and sustainable is that for me? right? Is this mode of my character, like the way I've been moving throughout the world to up until this point, has it been effective in my relationships? Because the eclipse season, or Gemini specifically, is kind of shining light in my seventh house, like on the cusp of my seventh and eighth house. And that's the house of relationship and just partnerships overall. And the eighth house is just that transformative energy that we kind of experience in our lives. So my perspectives and the way I engage in both relationship, partnership, communication style is all shifting and transforming. And so this month, I think I dedicated lots of alone time and just really taking that time to really settle in myself, ground specifically, because for someone who has like an air sign as predominant in her chart, this air season, being that it's in Gemini, I could stay up in the air for quite some time. So I've been spending lots of time just grounding and just settling my energy and allowing things to kind of like flow and really feel my body as it kind of moves through. So it's been really interesting, and just seeing how it plays out in my interpersonal relationships is also really beautiful to witness.
So that was jam-packed. You just
Yeah.
shared a lot, and I want to tease out a couple of the details that you shared, because for folks that are tuning in tonight, some of you may totally understand what Wilnise means by Gemini and air season and seventh house, right? And some of you are like, I don't even know what an eclipse is. So I want to take a moment to like talk a little bit about eclipses, right? Because we have this phenomena that happens couple times, 2 to 3 times a calendar year, where we have solar and lunar eclipse taking place. And they're the result of the alignment of the three, I think, most prominent celestial bodies, at least that affect us on the Earth, our own planet, Earth, the moon, our sort of sister celestial being, and the sun, which our orbit around the sun and our relationship to the sun, our position, our distance, all those factors are really set up so perfectly where we are the one planet in our solar system that has life as we know it. So first of all, what a beautiful, amazing gift of grace that we are not just here on an Instagram live the eve of a new solar eclipse, but just on this planet in proximity to the sun, having this relationship. So the Earth orbits around the sun, and the sun orbits around the moon. And the moon orbits around the Earth. Again. The Earth orbits around the sun, and the moon orbits around the Earth. And the orbit of the moon and its relationship to the Earth is tilted by about 5 degrees. So it's not a perfect parallel. It's a slight skew there. And so because of that, we have this relationship between the sun and the moon and the Earth that creates, first of all, the phenomena that we see with the shadowing of the moon throughout its 29.5-day cycle that produces what we know of as new moon and full moon. When the Earth and the sun and the moon are in a particular alignment, we see the full reflection of the sun's light, and we see that really bright moon, which happened last on May 26th and will happen again on June 24th. Tomorrow, the Earth and the sun and the moon are in such a position that the Earth is, there's a shadow. We don't see that sun reflected light. There's a shadow. And that's what we call the new moon or the dark moon. That's what's happening tomorrow. And a couple times a year, that 5-degree tilt of the moon's orbit aligns just right, where either the moon positions itself between the Earth and the sun, and the moon shadows the view of the sun, which is what we call a solar eclipse, or the Earth gets between the sun and the moon and shadows out the sun's light on the moon, on the full moon, which is a lunar eclipse. So on May 26th, that's what happened. The Earth was aligned just perfectly between the sun shining its light on the moon, so where it shadowed over the moon. The sun, the moon is now between the sun and the Earth, and it's going to shadow that Earth, that sun. And certain parts of Canada, the United States, Russia, Northern Hemisphere are going to be able to witness that tomorrow. And these phenomena always happen in pairs, and they don't happen every new and full moon because of that tilt, that 5-degree tilt. And so as Wilnise was sharing, that's like the physics phenomena. That's the astrophysics of what we're seeing, right?
Emily just
because you know, you and I are all like astronomy and astrology. We read these
Right.
things together. So that's the physical phenomena. But as you were sharing, when
Mm-hmm.
this somewhat unique, rare, only a couple times a year
Yeah.
situation takes place, it's really transformative. And
Mm-hmm.
the shadowing that happens on these celestial bodies as we see them from the earth creates this opportunity where something that's normally happening, like the sun, is
Yeah.
quieted for a little bit or shadowed for a little bit, so that the subconscious, the unconscious is being revealed. The things that are normally kind of behind the veil are now
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more available to us. So the sun is in Gemini, the moon is in Gemini. Communications, relationships, all these things are kind of emerging for us right now. And as you shared, you were taking a little more time for yourself. I think in any eclipse season, solar or lunar,
Mm-hmm.
specific times, and then in that sort of 2 week period, no matter what signs those eclipses fall in, I always emphasize patience, slow moving,
Mm-hmm.
gentle actions, carving out more space in your schedule intentionally,
Mm-hmm.
you know, letting yourself have, allowing yourself and giving yourself that space for introspection, for
Right.
reflection, for gleaning those
Mm-hmm.
nuanced insights that can come up during that time. And also, that gentleness and patience isn't just so we can listen to what the celestial events are trying to tell us in that sort of subconscious way, that shadowed way, but also so that we can move through transformation a little easier, transformation
Right.
of our beliefs, transformation of our behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think one thing I like to tell my students is like during eclipses, get comfortable with discomfort, because
Totally.
transformation is kind of like the metamorphosis of a butterfly.
Yeah.
We're in that cocoon, we're in that chrysalis, right? And we want to like
Mm-hmm.
out, and it's not comfortable to break out. But then once
Mm-hmm.
we emerge and sprawl our wings, then, you know, it feels very majestic. But
Right.
the process of caterpillar to butterfly in between those two can be a little
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable, and
Right.
not to, you know, expect discomfort, but to accept it if it comes, and to give
Mm-hmm.
yourself space and grace, right?
Right, exactly. I think you hit it on the nail, especially allowing ourselves the gentleness and the grace. Because sometimes we get really critical when we're not transforming or we're not doing these outward expressions of change, right? We feel as if there's some type of stagnation, but in truth, it's always an alignment. And so, whenever we allow ourselves that opportunity, so that the subconscious can emerge and really do its job to like filter out and really spotlight those aspects of ourselves that we kind of like tuck away when the sun's shining, right? Because it's easy to. We are allowed that opportunity to kind of really nurture it and give it room and space to breathe, so then we could choose if we're going to pick it up on our next journey or if we're going to drop it, right? And that's the whole idea of the release and just the beauty of the moon cycle through our orbit, and how it's, though it's short-lived, it's really beautiful in transforming our lives and creating just sustenance and really and such beautiful aspects. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate, Wilnise, what you said about being patient with ourselves through transformation, because just because the eclipse is early tomorrow morning at sunrise doesn't mean that suddenly tomorrow we're, you know, pulling up, shedding this skin and moving into the next. It's just sort of planting those seeds, catalyzing,
Exactly.
invoking that transformative process that, you know, may take until the next eclipse cycle to really
Exactly.
be expressed in our lives.
I
But
kind of
but
look,
being planted now, you know.
yeah, totally. I kind of look at the eclipse as like the slingshot, but right when you pull the slingshot back, right? And then whenever that point happens where you're kind of propelled into the next space, um, that's how I look at this, the eclipse season specifically, especially now, right? Because I know we're just in that pivotal time. It's summer. Folks are, energies are roaring, right? And we're all kind of ready to just burst out of our cocoons and
Mm-hmm.
fly. So, but we're really not at that point yet. I feel like that full moon coming up at the end of the month will probably be that pivotal time where we'll see, oh, this is the space for me to like spread out those wings. Yeah. For anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think generally speaking, in our, you know, sort of almost monthly cycle of new moon and full moon, new moons are really where we set our intentions, and full moons are really where we we express that action. And that
Right.
full moon we have coming up at the end of the month is also aligned, happening just a couple days after summer solstice.
Right.
Um, Arc of the summer season, and while a lot of our gardens are sort of breaking forth right now,
Yeah.
and you know, like we're on the precipice, but we're right just before that. So giving ourselves that grace and patience and space this week, just to kind of let that percolate another week or two, and then really,
Right.
that slingshot's going to be blasting forth into the galaxy in
Exactly.
a couple weeks. I love that.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, then we have
So,
this other. Yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say we have this other whole layer happening with retrograde right
I'm
now,
telling you,
right?
yeah.
Someone earlier, as you were sharing about retrogrades and Gemini and eclipses early on, was asking a
Mhm.
couple questions. So I think maybe we could break down first of all just a little bit astrophysics. What the
Yeah.
heck is retrograde? What does that really mean? And it essentially is. So Mercury, let's take that for example, because that's
Hmm.
the most frequent retrograde we hear about. Mercury among the planets in the solar system is the smallest planet. It's the closest to the sun, and it has the fastest orbit. And so we have all these planets orbiting the sun, and we're all moving at different spaces and different time stamps and different wavelengths as we're moving around. We're not like all nine of us, all 10 of us in sync around the sun in the same
Right.
way. And what happens when a planet enters retrograde motion, which is an astronomical term just as much as an astrological term,
Right.
is that when we see Mercury, for example, moving through the sky, we look Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, we look March, we look April, we look May, and every night when we go out, it looks as if it's moving a little bit more in the sky in a particular direction, a
Hmm.
particular line. And then there comes a point where it starts to look like it's actually moving in the other direction. And
Right.
that's what retrograde is. It's an apparent backward movement of a planet as we see it from the Earth. But it does not mean that Mercury, as it's spinning around the sun, has suddenly put on the brakes and now is going the other way. It's just
Right.
about the way that our two orbits around the sun are a little bit different. And one of the best ways I can describe it is like if you are on the interstate or if you're at a stoplight in your car and there's someone
Hmm.
in the car next to you and like you start moving ahead, like the light turns green and you start moving and the car next to you hasn't moved yet. Like when you're a little kid looking out the window, think about like your very innocent mind and you're looking just at a fixed point in the sky. Your car that you're in, your vehicle you're in starts moving forward. The car next to you is staying where it is. And in the view of your window, that little screen, it will look as if that slower car is moving actually in a backwards motion. Or
Yeah.
similarly, when like you're sitting in a train and it starts to take off at the station and it's really
Yeah.
slow, there's this like 5 or 10 seconds where the scenery outside looks like it's moving backwards and things feel a little bit weird and shifty. And that's a similar phenomenon. That's like a similar way that we can relate to what's happening on Earth as we're seeing Mercury or Saturn, any planet that's going retrograde. It's just our two orbits have reached this sort of crossing point where because of the differences in our speed, there's going to be a particular span of time that it looks like they're going backwards. And then
Hmm.
when we move around to a different part of our orbit, it's going to look like it's speeding forward in its regular direction again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's sort of the astrophysics of it. Just to break it down, because I feel like
Hmm.
a lot of people, are reading like Cosmo magazine or something. They're
Yeah.
like Mercury retrograde, and it's like, what is this even all about? So that's
Yeah.
why there are certain dates in the year or
Hmm.
certain years on a cycle for those planets on the farther edges of our solar system where they move into retrograde. And Mercury we hear about the most because its orbit is the smallest, and
Hmm.
these events happen more frequently because
Right.
it's moved quicker. It moved into retrograde on May 29th. It's going to stay in retrograde till June 22nd.
Yeah.
Have about a 3-week span.
Yeah.
Saturn, on the other hand, one of those farther planets away from the sun, longer orbit, bigger planet, farther from us, it's going to have a longer retrograde period. It moved into
Right.
retrograde on the 2nd, and it's going to stay there until, I think, October 10th.
Right.
And that's a longer period that happens less frequently because it's a bigger planet. And so that's like the physics of it, but each of these planets in an astrological sense has a domain, has a
Mm-hmm.
quality that it
Yeah.
affects planet. And so when a planet moves in that apparent backward motion, goes into a retrograde period, those
Mm-hmm.
things that each of those planets uniquely governs is
Mm-hmm.
affected.
Right.
And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, like how retrograde in Mercury is playing out in our lives right now.
Yeah, totally. So, like Emily said, each planet has a certain corresponding quality that we kind of refer to it, right? The energetic corresponding quality that it plays out on in this earth plane for us to kind of communicate and realize that energy. So Mercury, for instance, is our communication center. It's those way in which we communicate, it's technology, right? So that's why whenever we see Mercury retrograding, or what folks like to see as Gatораting, right, we kind of get frazzled and frustrated because our interactions kind of get commingled, and there are certain mishaps that happen. Sometimes we see an uptake of accidents, right, because our communication highways are either sped up or stagnant or lacking, depending on how it expressed in your chart, right? Because that's, again, a very personal and unique expression. But collectively, Mercury allows us to tap into that intellectual mind, right? It allows us to understand our perspectives and like make sense of them. So whenever it's moving backwards, essentially, or retrograding, it might seem as if our perception is kind of skewed, right? Sometimes there's illusions that show up that we don't really understand, right? There's miscommunications that happen, right? If this live were to glitch, we could always blame that on Mercury retrograding. And maybe just being, it could be heavy on your chart or heavy on mine or heavy on ours collectively. But whenever a planet's retrograding, that you could say the expression of that planet's quality within just our interactions with each other expresses itself. And I don't want to say negative, maybe an opposite direction, right? So Saturn, for instance, Saturn is our structure. That's our foundation. It's our authority, right? It's the way in which we assign principles in our life, right? I always look at Saturn as the authoritarian, and I always have like this really funny relationship with the Saturnian energy. But I love that Saturn is retrograding right now, specifically while Mercury is retrograding, because it really allows kind of like this breathing room for me personally, to see where maybe there are some cracks in the foundation, right? Because if Saturn was stronger in its aspect right now as it's orbiting, just, metaphysically, we would see those foundations cracked a little bit deeper, and then we wouldn't have the tools or the resources in order to fill those spaces, or at least we would feel that way, right? Because the communication is lost. So Saturn retrograding is a beautiful gift, in my personal opinion, specifically in this time, because it kind of gives us a breathing room so that if we did have oppositions to needing our foundations to be readjusted, or the way in which we see authority, for instance, or the way we see structure and foundation in our lives, we have the opportunity to kind of really give ourselves the grace to see what spaces can we build more building blocks so that the foundation is structured and just solid and so on solid ground, versus being kind of forced and pushed to it. Because Saturn is kind of like that strict teacher, right? I always look at him as like that grandfather that is that stoic teacher that loves you, but is very I don't want to say harsh in expression, but just a little, it's not as nice as maybe another planet might be in its lessons. But Saturn helps us to be in our bodies, right? For us to see buildings being structured, for us to have physical reality, right? Like for us to like be formed, right, in our bodies. So for us to have bones, right? So we need that aspect to be firm and kind of stoic in its expression. But sometimes a little flexibility is nice. And so Saturn retrograding is kind of that, I feel.
Absolutely. And I love how you express that, because I think that, especially for Mercury, which I think is the most common one that we hear about in
Mhm.
mainstream retrograde, there's sort of this automatic like, oh, Mercury's retrograde, everything's gonna fall apart, everything's, this is not a positive time. But I think it's actually a pause, like you say. I mean, Mercury, for example, is, the sort of associated with, like, Mercury is the messenger god in mythology. And so Mercury as the planet in governing things that are messaging or traveling from one place to another, whether it's communication from me to you, or whether it's my car going from point A to point B, or whether it's an email going from my computer to your computer. These are all a domain of Mercury. And I think that something I like to think about is that Mercury retrograde isn't necessarily, things aren't necessarily falling apart because a planet retrograde. That planet's retrograde movement is allowing that pause to show where there are cracks and weaknesses that we may not see, and giving us an opportunity to correct them and to fix them. Like you say, we might not realize or have awareness of the tools to make those adjustments in the regular movement period, whereas in retrograde it really just opens up that awareness for us. And so it gets, especially Mercury, right? The more frequent one gets this rap about, our emails are going to end up in spam, our Instagram fall apart, our hard drive is like mine did this week. Those are very good things. But I think there are also some types of communication that are really favorable in a retrograde period. And of course, there's nuances about where, the planet that Mercury's in sit in your chart, what planet is your natal Mercury in, and all that. We can dive into it. But as a generality, I would say that communications in relationships, especially people that we haven't been in touch with for a while, especially maybe areas where there are tension and there are wounds that we've kind of let scab over that may need to put a little salve on and heal in an emotional way. I feel like reaching out to folks that we haven't talked to in a while is really something that is quite common in Mercury. In fact, I can't think of a Mercury retrograde in the last several years where I haven't had like an old friend pop up out of nowhere and call or write or run into someone that I haven't seen in a long time. Those folks from our past tend to recirculate through in those periods so that we can reconnect communication or complete communication if things were left untended. And also I think that it's a time to, for me, that really completing tasks that have piled up, like maybe those things that I've procrastinated and let kind of, stack up on my desk for a while. There tends to be this sort of productive, efficient energy in retrograde period where as long as I just sit down, I can kind of plow through some of those tasks that are lingering. And by the end of a retrograde, actually feel a lot more accomplished and completed with things that are sort of tickling at me otherwise, and gnawing at me sometimes. And I also think organizing.
Yes.
Things like your filing cabinet, things like your files on your desktop, things like that kitchen drawer that all the junk goes in and you don't really know what's in there and you can't find anything. Like Mercury retrograde for me is always a time that those tasks of decluttering and of organizing in those physical ways tends to be really favorable. And also thinking of it in emotional and internal ways too. How can I kind of declutter what's going on in my mind and my practice of self-care and my health regimen? Like, how can I organize that a little better too?
Yeah, I'm curious to know where Mercury falls in your chart, because that sounds very Virgoian of you to feel so called that, the Mercury could be in Virgo or it could be in your sixth house or something. Yeah, it's really interesting how that shows up, because for me, communication is highlighted. Totally. Travel and communication. Those are the spaces that just kind of ring fire for me. Whenever Mercury is retrograding, I get an opportunity to like reassess and watch my words, sit with my words more. Right? So it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's something that I try be mindful of in Mercury retrograde periods, for instance, is being really meticulous in my speech and my words. I'm sure that, like, if any of our moon medicine students are tuning in, even though
Yeah.
I edited this week's workbook like 10 times, I'm sure you
Yeah.
probably have a typo. That's really
Right.
common.
Yeah.
Any important emails that I
Yeah.
send, I always kind of draft them, come back to them in a little bit of time, re-edit them, reread them, and then send them out. But I
Right.
think it's actually, especially for those of us that aren't really editors by nature, I think it's a really favorable time for
Mm-hmm.
us to feel that energy, to feel clear about how maybe something that we wrote before Mercury retrograde, if we revisit it now, we may find that we're communicating it with more clarity and better
Mm-hmm.
articulation during
Mm-hmm.
retrograde. My natal Mercury is Aquarius, so
Oh.
that may make sense. My communication is all that area Aquarius.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, so yeah, but so, and speaking of Aquarius, so the sun and the moon are always in the same sign at a new moon, and then a full
Mm-hmm.
moon at what you might call polar signs. Their signs are opposite on the zodiac
Right.
chart. Astronomically and astrologically, the zodiac is based and rooted in 12 constellations that go on this sort of trajectory across the sky, and were named and were sort of studied for their energies, eons ago,
Mm-hmm.
generations and generations ago, by many different cultures. And because of shifts in our planet's orbit and the sun's orbit, there are certainly different, something called the precession of the equinoxes. What we see in the sky is a little bit different now than the energies that might be overlying in their signs. But this 12 zodiac signs are divided into four elements: earth,
Mm-hmm.
air, fire, and water.
Mm-hmm.
And so Gemini, the sun is in Gemini right now, and the moon is in
Yeah.
Gemini right now, and also Mercury in its retrograde backward motion
Mm-hmm.
is in Gemini now. And Gemini is an air sign. And that energy is really, the Gemini energy is really present for us this week because of those 3 planets expressing that energy. I wonder if you could share a little bit more with us, Wilnise, about how Gemini plays out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love all the signs, but I think one of my favorite signs are the Geminis, right? Though I guess maybe because that's my opposing sign or my opposite sign. That's a Sag sun. But Gemini teaches us how to use our intellectual mind. Like, it really shows us how to put our words down and make sense of our words, right? It teaches us perception. It teaches us awareness, right? So it's really interesting to be in a season where we have the solar energy, the lunar energy, and Mercury's energy in its home sign, right? So that means that retrograde period is really powerful for a lot of us, for those of us who have like strong aspects of it. But Gemini are like the divine twins in the cosmic sky, and for me, I always see them as like perception, right? It's like the duality of how we perceive, right? Not necessarily good or bad, but that there are always two sides of a coin, or two sides to a story, and two perspectives to see. And so it's always a choice that we make to see, to highlight either or see both, right? And that's the balanced aspect of a Gemini quality. Geminis are air signs, right? So they're very sociable people. And so it's really interesting how that season correlates with summer, and specifically summer solstice, right? We get an opportunity to really ignite ourselves and just socialize with folks. Gemini is a beautiful, powerful sign because, again, it teaches us how to perceive, right? Look at situations at least the most highest perspective we can to reach an outcome that we agree with, right? That's the balanced aspect. Of course, we don't always have a balanced perspective view, right? But the Gemini quality just really allows us the opportunity to look at all sides of the coin to reach a point that makes sense for us in our realities, right? In the body, Gemini rules the lungs, right? How we breathe air, right? How we convert oxygen, I believe, our minds, our brain, right? So all those, our hands, right? Again, what we use to touch and feel and make sense of the world around us. So the divine twins in our sky is just, it's a beautiful ally energetically to tap into for anyone who just doesn't have the capacity to understand, right? Because I know we kind of often see where Gemini gets a bad rap for being like that dual personality, kind of two-faced cohort, right? But really in truth, it allows us the opportunity to see all sides of something. And so it's always our choice to make those differences and really stand firm in our awareness, right? Though we're always up in the air with that Gemini quality. We can learn how to ground it, and use it to our best advantage.
Yeah. I think especially thinking about the eclipse season, the solar eclipse tomorrow morning, Gemini, Mercury retrograde in Gemini, what we've discussed about communication, it feels like
Mm-hmm.
that concept, like I love how you described it, seeing both sides, I
Yeah.
think is something that, especially if, in a relationship and, someone
Mm-hmm.
that mentioned reaching out to a loved one that's been estranged during this, they were thinking about waiting until after
Yeah.
Mercury retrograde is over, but perhaps this is actually a favorable time for that with that Gemini influence and,
Mm-hmm.
that retrograde, that space that it gives us. So I
Yeah.
think I just love that concept of Gemini helping us see both
Mm-hmm.
sides, because you're right, a lot of times Gemini, especially if it's not super favorable in our own natal chart, feels a
Yeah.
little bit that duplicity there. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so there was a couple really good questions in the chat I had a chance to scroll through. I want to mention those real quick, and one of those is for those of you that are like, this is completely new to me, I'm just kind of now, the new moon is dark and the full moon is bright, and sort of around eclipse and retrogrades. You and I have both mentioned natal charts or
Mm-hmm.
birth charts, which is the moment that we were born. Take a snapshot of the sky and discern which constellation each planet was in at that moment of our birth. And
Mm-hmm.
so if someone walks up to you in a bar and says, "What's your sign?" they
Yeah.
mean what sign was the sun in when you were born. And if your birthday is between like May 20th and June 20th, that's Gemini season of the sun. So if your birthday is this month, then your sun sign is a Gemini. And a birth chart or a natal chart basically is that sort of map of what the planets and constellations, where they were positioned at the moment of your birth. There's a lot of astrologers, personal astrologers that can create
Mm-hmm.
those for you. There's a lot of websites and
Yeah.
apps on your phone that can pull those up for you at our moonmedicine.org website. We also offer those, but for those of you that were trying to kind of wonder, okay, well, what is a natal chart or what are my natal planets? Then that a natal chart is something that a program or a website or an astrologer can provide for you. And there's so many layers to it. It's not just which planet is in which sign, but it's
Yeah.
also which they fall in. And I
Yeah.
really have encouraged students in our most recent round of the moon medicine course that are very new to the study to just kind of take one element at a time, figure out like what is your sun in Gemini or your sun in Pisces or your sun in Sagittarius mean, and then look at what does your moon mean, and then peel back the layers of your houses and then get into aspects. It's, for me, it's really, I've been studying probably my chart for 12 or 15 years
Yeah.
somewhat diligently, and I offer new understandings of it every day.
Every single
So,
time.
so for those of you that are, baby astrologers and you're trying to wrap your head around what Wilnise and I are saying, don't get intimidated if you run out and get your natal chart and see a lot of stuff. It like take piece by piece and digest it, because it's really an encyclopedia of celestial information that influences us because of that was what was happening at the time that we were born.
Yeah.
There was another great question. I wonder if you have some thoughts on this one. So one of our students, actually, hi Hannah, asked about pulling cards or doing any types of things or divinations that normally she'll do a new moon card pull or tarot reading, and wondering how the eclipse might affect that. Should she postpone pulling her cards until after that half-hour window of the eclipse? Should she go ahead and do it during the eclipse? How might that eclipse energy, and I think this would be for anyone that is pulling cards or doing some meditations or has other practices that do along with the moons, how might an eclipse at a new moon or a full moon affect that process?
Well, personally, for me, I always find eclipse seasons to be the seasons or those moments to just be, because the magic is already kind of configuring for you in your favor. So, even for me personally, I really take that time to really rest and allow those energies to just manifest and play out. And then maybe as the moon is still new or full, a day or two after the eclipse, like at that peak, is when I'll probably play around with whatever I feel called to do at the moment. But what's beautiful about the eclipse season is that the need for us to dive deep into ritual is not always necessary because the planets are allowing us the space and the room to do that organically. So the work is being done, right? And so it's really our time to really deeply introspect and just sit with ourselves and allow those energies to transform as they need to, without much resistance. Because I feel like when we pull things in, it can create some restriction and resistance. Whereas when we're just, being in this space, it allows more flow and ease, specifically in an eclipse season. So I like to just be, right, and sit with the moon, meditate, sure. But as far as rituals go, I always wait after. That's just what I do in my personal practice, because I feel that energy of really sitting with myself and being and listening and allowing that stillness to transform energetically, without much resistance, it's beautiful, and it helps me personally.
I love that, Wilnise. I think
Yeah.
I agree. I think that for me, even if we can't see the eclipse
Hmm.
visibly, so some of you in the very upper east of the US and on the east coast
Yeah.
of Canada, you might have a chance in the morning to see it. Now, don't look at it with your naked eye. Solar
Yeah.
eclipses are very dangerous because
Yeah.
actually looking at the sun can cause retinal damage. But when we look during an eclipse, because the sun might be darkened, our
Mhm.
eyes are more dilated. We actually can cause more damage. But if you go to moonmedicine.org and download our moon workbook, we have instructions for how you can make a pinhole projector and
Mhm.
safe view an eclipse without looking at it directly. However, if you're not in the Northeast and you aren't in the viewing window, it's not, that energy is still affecting us. And I
Of course.
absolutely advocate in lunar and solar eclipses to be restful, to give
Mhm.
space for rest,
Mhm.
acknowledging that energy, like you're saying, Wellness, is happening in the physical realm and is affecting us physically and energetically. And that metamorphosis is a process, and giving
Mhm.
ourselves that space for resting allows that metamorphosis to happen
Mhm.
with less resistance. It allows us to integrate those changes
Mhm.
and have that be more fluid. So I
Mhm.
definitely really for that. And I also think that in addition to rest, leaning on our nervine herb, um,
Yes.
linden, some rose, some,
Yes.
any of your elixirs and tonics and
Mhm.
teas, just supporting your body more in that way. Um, so yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Hannah. That was a great question. And I think that I want to share, just kind of in wrapping up, that all these things that Wilnise and I have talked about, and this sort of study of the stars, is something that I know for both Wilnise and I, we integrate into our gardening practices. It
Yeah.
helps discern when is a favorable time to plant seed,
Mhm.
when is a favorable time to harvest, when is a better time for us to mow the lawn or rake the leaves and let things rest. It's something that we integrate into our medicine making. Well, Lisa and I are both herbalists, and so when we're going to put up a tincture, when we're going to harvest it, when it's
Yeah.
time to blend a bath soap, these types
Mhm.
of things are something that we take into account as we're planning our medicine making. And
Mhm.
the physical health, as Monique mentioned, Gemini governs our breath and our sensory experience, our nervous
Mhm.
system. So in Gemini periods, there may be more of those types of challenges and concerns presenting
Right.
themselves. Certainly our emotional well-being, and
Yeah.
give space for rest, and when we're feeling tensions or resistance or emotions that are circulating and overwhelming us, looking and seeing what's happening in the sky really helps us better understand and acknowledge what might be taking place, which
Mhm.
in a further extension, at least I know for me and a lot of my students, really affects and influences the health of our relationships, and,
Oh,
and
yeah.
lets us know those sticky times with more grace and on a bigger picture, like planning and manifesting. So I know we've thrown down a lot of terminology that might be new for
Yeah.
some of you. Know that there's a lot of energy we this particular week, but I hope that the little glimpse that we've shared today will definitely if happen for something that you can integrate, that there'll be one little gem that you can glean from it. And as the solar eclipse happens in the morning, or in these next few weeks as Mercury remains retrograde, that it's something that you can kind of use as a tool and integrate. And Wilnise and I have been having a lot of fun since December,
Yeah.
sharing a lot of these tools through our medicine course, and we're opening up another round of that year-long course with the summer solstice in June. And as I mentioned at the start of our talk today, at our website, moonmedicine.org, our new moon solar eclipse workbook is now live. You can download your copy of it. It's 25 pages that talks about what's happening astronomically in the sky, when to see certain planets in the morning or the evening. It gives a lot more information about the zodiac influence of Gemini, that air sign, and how it affects our emotions, and herbs that are associated with Gemini, gardening tips during this season. We've shared a little bit more about Mercury retrograde, shared a lot about the science of eclipses and the energy of eclipses, the spirit of it. And like I said, there's some tools and instructions for how you can make your own pinhole projector if you're in the viewing window tomorrow. But we certainly encourage and invite you to check out that website and download that workbook. And there's also a number of other video classes from Wilnise and I posted on that page that if you are feeling seduced by the stars like we have been, it'll give you a little more nuggets to geek out on. And we have an early bird discount for the class through midnight tomorrow night. Those of you that want to join us on the journey for the year starting at summer solstice. And if you aren't following Wilnise yet on Instagram, please go over and hit that follow button. She shares so many amazing gems of medicine and astrology and herbs and plants and gardening, and just walking with the world with such magnificence and grace. And if you follow Wilnise, you'll also get a little coupon code to add another $50 discount off that course. So head on over to her profile. And we have payment plans and all sorts of cool stuff that you can check out again on our website, moonmedicine.org. But in this eve of the new moon solar eclipse, I just want to honor all of you that have spent some time tonight to share with us. I hope that there is one little gem, tool, or practice that we've shared that can help you capture and glean and harvest and put to work this really auspicious energy we have with these retrogrades. And want to especially thank you, Wilnise, for giving us your grace and wisdom and time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure being with family. It's beautiful.
Likewise. Well, thank you all for coming, and be sure to get your workbook at moonmedicine.org. And until we see you next time, happy moon gazing, everyone.